Austin Software Cooperatives Meetup. This is our February 2021 meetup where we'll be doing a book review of The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age by Ben Kasnocha, Chris Yee, and Reed Hoffman. And Will be leading us today in this book review. Will, you ready?
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, okay. I didn't know when I was going to come in, but all right, I guess welcome everyone for the evening. The agenda we see here, we got our welcome right now. We're going to talk about the book, then have an open discussion. I think, so it's, I would say it's not a short book, but I would say it's a pretty quick read. So what we'll probably do is I'll go over my notes chapter by chapter, and then probably at the end of each chapter, stop for discussion. And if you have any comments or questions, then feel free to ask as we go. So, yeah, this is a book called The Alliance. I found out about this book from the CEO of a company I used to work for. I think that it's a really great book for a good framework. So, oh yeah, I was going to say, I want to frame this in the backdrop of the context of this particular group. I think the Alliance provides a really good framework for how to realistically organize a group of people in an organization that's designed to operate in the current and an evolving career and job market. You'll hear a lot of talk about employee and employer in the readings, but you can just replace that with team member in the context of a co-op. I would say in the context of a co-op, amongst the different partners, associates, or members, there exists an ad hoc sort of rotating employee-employer relationship as opposed to the strictly hierarchical one in a traditional company, and that relationship changes and evolves over time. And I feel like the Alliance provides a great framework for thinking about that relationship and making it a positive relationship for everyone involved. So, all right, I'm gonna screen share my my Kindle app. So I can do that right here. All right, so let me move this out of the way. So let's start with the opening chapter and the backdrop of this here. The first chapter is employment in the networked age. So the first highlight here, today few companies offer guaranteed employment with a straight face. Such assurances are perceived by employees as naive, disingenuous, or both. Instead, employers talk about retention and tenure with fuzzy language. Their goal is to retain good employees, and the time frame is indefinitely. This fuzziness actually destroys trust. The company is asking employees to commit to itself without committing in return. Both parties act in ways that blatantly contradict their official positions, and thanks to reciprocal self-deception, neither side trusts the other. Not surprisingly, neither side profits as fully as it might from their relationship. Employers continually lose valuable people. Employees fail to fully invest in their current positions because they're constantly scanning the marketplace for new opportunities. The old model of employment was a good fit for an era of stability. In stable times, companies grew larger to leverage economies of scale and process improvement. These titans offered an implicit deal to their workers. We provide lifelong employment in exchange for loyal service. Maximizing employee security is a prime goal. This is a quote of Earl Willis, General Electric's manager of employee business, and this is in 1962. Long-term investment took a back seat to short-term cost-cutting measures like right-sizing, or as they refer to it, firing people. Adaptability and entrepreneurship became key to achieving and sustaining success in business in the evolving market. And so the Alliance, on the other hand, posits that if we can't go back to the age of lifetime employment and the status quo is untenable, it's time to rebuild the employee-employer relationship. The business world needs a new employment framework that facilitates mutual trust, mutual investment, and mutual benefit. An ideal framework encourages employees to develop their personal networks and act entrepreneurially without becoming mercenary job hoppers. It allows companies to be dynamic and demanding, but discourages them from treating employees like disposable assets. The Alliance lays out a path forward for companies and their employees. We can't restore the old model of lifetime employment, but we can build a new type of loyalty that both recognizes economic realities and allows companies and employees to commit to each other. Think of employment as an alliance, a mutually beneficial deal with explicit terms between independent players. Get to my next note. Okay, so the next section, and let me make sure I haven't skipped over too much, talks about moving from the framework of traditionally the employer-employer relationship being talked about as a family. And this section is talking about evolving from that framework. So in a real family, parents can't fire their children. Imagine disowning a child for poor performance. I find this example amusing. We're sorry, Susie, but your mom and I have decided you're just not a good fit for us. Your table setting skills aren't delivering the exceptional customer service experiences we're known for. We're going to have to let you go. But don't take it the wrong way. It's just family. That'd be completely unthinkable in a family setting. So this framework posits moving towards that of a team member. In this sense, the business is far more like a sports team than a family. Teams win when their individual members trust each other enough to prioritize team success over individual glory. Paradoxically, winning as a team is the best way for team members to achieve individual success. The members of the winning team are highly sought out by other teams, both for their skills individually and then also their ability to help a team develop a winning culture. And just a second. So the next note I have here, let me make sure that I'm not, okay, cool. I just don't want to skip over too much. So the idea, oh, hold on. I did want to add one more piece back. So in contrast, a professional sports team has a specific mission to win games and championships, and its members come together to accomplish that mission. The composition of the team changes over time, either because a team member chooses to go to another team or because the team's management decides to cut or trade a team member. In this sense, a business is far more like a sports team than a family. So I think that's an important framing. And so then we jump to, this particular book is written by people who have been very successful at building and, very successful technology companies in Silicon Valley. And so a lot of the things that are talked about are in the frame of their thinking about how they were able to create that in the first place and how they've been able to replicate that in their careers since. And also, they're all VCs at this point, I'm pretty sure, each of the writers. And this is also what they try to instill in the companies that they invest in. So the real secret of Silicon Valley is that it's really all about the people. Sure, there are plenty of stories in the press about the industry's young geniuses, but surprisingly few about its management practices. What the mainstream press misses is that Silicon Valley's success comes from the way its companies build alliances with their employees. And I like this other one right here too. People with the founder mindset drive change, motivate people, and just get stuff done. So this strategy is designed around recruiting and retaining and building an alliance, building a group of these sorts of people that can help your company be successful through helping them be successful also. And so I really like the examples that they talk about in terms of companies doing a poor job at this and then companies doing a good job at this. So company doing a poor job at this is an example of that is Disney's management firing John Lasseter, excuse me. So John Lasseter was an employee at Disney. He was one of their animators, and he got really interested in 3D animation, and he wanted to get Disney into doing that. But the higher ups at Disney weren't interested in it at all, and they actually fired him. And their rationale was that he was too distracted with his crazy ideas. And Disney's management hired an entrepreneurial talent like Lasseter, but they treated him as a commodity rather than an ally. And in the process, they lost their chance to develop a multi-billion-dollar business. So Walt Disney later on famously purchased Pixar for $7 billion. I'm sure that they would have rather developed that particular thing in-house instead of losing that. And so that is an important thing that you can see about doing a good job at this. And so a positive example is Benjamin Black at AWS. So he was one of the early Amazon employees, and he noticed that Amazon got really good at managing their software infrastructure waxes and wanes in terms of their capacity. And he realized that that expertise was something that Amazon could sell and that it would be a really positive thing for people. And so they launched AWS in 2006. And as of 2013, that was a $4 billion company. And I looked up the recent numbers for it, and it is $500 billion company, $500 billion business now, $500 billion. So this is an important thing for people to think about in terms of how they are managing the relationship between each other and an organization. So I like this other quote. As Intuit CEO Brad Smith told us, a leader's job is not just to put greatness into people, but rather to recognize that it already exists and create an environment where greatness can emerge and grow. And the alliance isn't just an argument that we need a new way of doing business. It's a blueprint for how to actually do it. And so that concludes the first chapter about the backdrop of the alliance. Comments, questions, suggestions?
Yeah, there's a lot in here that I've seen this evolving over time in business books going back to 2000. Even just going back to Tom Peters with Reinvent, and John Maxwell is another one. Believe it or not, Robert Kiyosaki. A lot of these, the writing's been on the wall with going from Job for Life in the 50s and so on and so forth, with people working on assembly lines and so on and so forth. And in the 70s, there were some, I think it was the 70s, and there were some critical changes where pensions were starting to get taxed differently. The law was a bit different, and then 401ks came into play, and it basically Job for Life was dead at that point. You know, so but people still act like they should have job. You know, they should have loyalty to some company that they don't have any vested interest in or ownership in. So yeah, the writing's been on the wall, and people have been saying it. This is interesting how they're putting it as far as trying to recapture the interest of the people and just accept that we should all accept that there's no job for life. That's all.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I gotta say, yeah, it was just so I guess this is my first time here. I haven't read the book. I don't know if that's like, I came to just listen and see whether so maybe I'm not sure if I'm using the space right. but it reminded me of the kind of moving, the ability to hop between and like raising that, like people want to hop between for growth, and reminded me of the it comes up a lot that Twitter and Facebook, or maybe it was like I don't know. They just did an engineer exchange to like where people didn't need to quit and they could like have their assumptions challenged. And so they kind of organized it around, I don't know, it was just a neat kind of odd corporate vulnerability sort of thing where they, moved between and then had a process of sharing what they learned. Because like, the things that you learned didn't work in one place might actually totally fucking work great in another one, and you've just thrown it, assumed it won't work. I don't know. Yeah. I guess in our co-op, we kind of think about that a lot and try to build our networks to share and do those hoppings.
That's cool.
Cool. I had a thought also, and I'm gonna turn my camera on. Wave at y'all. Hello. And I think one of the things I picked up on, it's right before the quote you highlighted about the right sizing, or what we used to call it, firing people. And right before that, it says, it talks about how the world changed both philosophically and technologically. And the quote that I took out of that paragraph was, the rise of shareholder capitalism led companies and managers to focus on hitting short-term financial targets to boost stock prices. And that's something that I found to be interesting, because I think about that a lot, and how like cooperatives are just kind of a different type of ownership model than the shareholder capitalism that became dominant, I think, because of what's his name, Friedman, and like kind of the Chicago school thoughts. I still think this is a great idea. I don't think that like co-ops are going to bring back lifetime employment. I actually really thought that the thesis of the alliance and like establishing tours of duties was a really cool concept that I'm sure we'll get into as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. That is really the central sort of piece. I think a lot of the other things are built around that, but certainly the tour of duty is the central piece.
I guess it's like one thing that I know I'm going to be listening for going through this is like, it sounds like there's a lot of assumptions, or maybe assumptions of closures. Like it's like, hey, people will leave and then they won't come back. And it's trying to like make it so they can be captured as long as they want, but released when they want. And it makes me like, from all like coming from a community organizing and like open source areas, it's like, oh, are the things that they're about to say, are they going to equally apply when we're imagining systems that have less closures, where people like leave and come back, and like that's just as good as getting the best of a time and having someone go and probably not come back. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just curious whether it'll be a different mentality that he's building this from.
So we'll definitely get more into it in the next chapter, and I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are. But I would say that it is basically bringing a lot of that to a traditional organization. That's what it's designed to do. because I think open source projects really have this sort of model to begin with. So yeah. All right. Any more? Or shall we go to the next section?
I guess my main thing on all of it in the intro is leaning into honest conversations on both parties. And part of it that's there is you can have employees and employers that aren't even thinking about the fact that they're lying to each other. They're just talking because that's the way it is. But uncovering that, and you may go, oh, we both actually have no interest in lying. Let's figure out how to work together. And I appreciate how that kept going as you unfold the layers.
Yeah. All right. Going once, going twice. Okay, so on to chapter 2, the tour of duty. So in the context of the alliance, the tour of duty represents an ethical commitment by employer and employee to a specific mission. By recasting careers at your company as successive tours of duty, you can better attract and retain entrepreneurial employees. A few of the managers that they spoke with for this book worried that the tour of duty framework might give employees, quote unquote, permission to leave, but permission is not yours to give or to withhold. And believing you have that power is simply a self-deception that leads to a dishonest relationship with you and your employees. And I remember laughing at this particular section when I wrote this note originally. The finite term of the tour of duty provides crisper focus and a mutually agreeable time frame for discussing the future of the relationship. Let me skip past that note. When I originally wrote this, when I was originally reading this book, I was working at LinkedIn, and it had been recently acquired by Microsoft, and Kevin Scott is referred to as the Senior Vice President of Engineering. And he was named the CTO of Microsoft when we were purchased by Microsoft. And so internally at LinkedIn, people would relentlessly troll him by calling him the CTO of Microsoft all the time, every day. So acknowledging that the employee might leave is actually the best way to build trust and thus develop the kind of relationship that convinces great people to stay. And so talking about different types of tours of duty, the initial type is rotational. The rotational isn't personalized to the employee and tends to be highly interchangeable. It's easy to swap an employee into or out of a predefined role. The first flavor of rotational is a structured program of finite duration, usually aimed at entry-level employees. For example, investment banks and management consultancies have 2 to 4 year analyst programs. Everyone is in the same program, generally for a fixed period of time and for a single go-around. These programs are often explicit on-ramps to transition new employees from school to work or from their previous employer to the new employer's unique work environment. Another example I can think of off the top of my head is Facebook famously has a boot camp program where you rotate between different things. LinkedIn has a similar thing. The other sort of, the second type of tour of duty is a transformational. So unlike the rotational tour, a transformational tour is personalized. The focus is less on a fixed time period and more on the completion of a specific mission. It's negotiated one-on-one by you and your employee. So a foundational is the third that they talk about in this book. And for those, they pick examples that many might know. Johnny Ives, famously at Apple. I don't know the other names as well myself, but these are people whose lives are fundamentally intertwined with their companies, and they're on a foundational tour of duty. And so these are people who are inextricably linked with a company from its very founding, or a new business unit or a new project. So for instance, Aston Motes, the first employee at Dropbox, and I'm sure that there are many other names that you could think of where it's like this person is almost as synonymous as the founding team if they are not on the founding team of a group. And so if I can make this big some kind of way, you can kind of just check about the, I like this table right here that compares the different types of tour of duty frameworks. And I'll probably come back to this after I go through the rest of my notes so we can use that as the framework, but I won't read through it all there. So the optimal blend of rotational, transformation, and foundational tours depends on the specific market conditions of your company. Silicon Valley's companies, including startups, rely primarily, roughly 80%, on transformational tours, with a small number of foundational and rotational employees. This allows them to field a high-performance, highly adaptable workforce. In contrast, a manufacturing company with a stable market and a quasi-monopoly would probably rely far more on rotational tours for routine, lower value, in their words, and foundational tours for tapping legacy knowledge. And all right, that concludes the introductory chapter of the tour of duty. So, thoughts?
Yeah, so the thing I liked about this is the kind of focus on hiring people to complete like missions and objectives, rather than kind of like the open-endedness of this is your title and a set of repeating tasks that never end. And obviously it has like basis in the military, which I thought was interesting that they used that as the kind of analogy. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think this was my my favorite part of the book was the tour concept. I think that's a big takeaway from the book.
Yeah, this is a great summary, by the way. Feels super dense.
Okay.
I think Ryan, you have me now thinking. I think I noticed it before. I don't know. It's whatever we root our analogies in is often, it kind of shapes how we think about things. So whenever I hear like war analogies and sports analogies or whatever, I try to just think, what's the, like what, I don't have an answer, but I'm just like, oh, what's like, is there an ecological version of this? Like a larger system that's been through many more iterations that this kind of rhymes with, or like feels like it learns from. But anyway, it's just a question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I think the other interesting point I took away from this chapter is how they view the alliance as like a synthesis of the previous two types of employment. So we talked about the lifetime employment a lot, but in the summary we didn't really get into like the current one, which they call free agency, which is kind of like the deceptive one that we touched on briefly. And so that was I think another important part of the framework is like, how do we go from like, let's not be extreme, like what is kind of like the middle ground here.
Gotcha. Yeah. Do you know which part of the book that was in?
So I have the paper copy, and that's page 23.
Okay.
So it's actually it's very close to the beginning of the chapter. It's like the first break. So you got like the first 3 intro paragraphs, and then there's a break, and then I've been just looking at that section.
Cool. Let's see if we can find it really quick, because I think that's important also.
Yeah, so the phrase tour of duty, that's kind of that, and the next 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs is what I've been talking about.
Okay, let's see. The phrase tour of duty, soldiers will typically serve multiple tours of duty.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you go down to the bottom of the next paragraph, there's a section about the accomplishing a specific mission right above your highlighting. And then actually right after your highlighting is the other part that I called out.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, because I think that's important too. So we see this approach as a way to incorporate some of the advantages from both lifetime employment and free agency. Lifetime employment, the tour of duty allows employees and employers to build trust and mutual investment. Like free agency, it preserves the flexibility that both employers and employers need to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Yeah, I think that's an important bit of this also.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember how they framed the free agency bit?
So in the first chapter, that was kind of talking about like right to work type stuff, where you're a free agent and, you know, either the employee or the employer has the right to like leave, come and go. Maybe not so much the coming part. But it's kind of like just the independent actor type mentality, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Going once, going twice. All right. So, and on to the third chapter, building a tour of duty. The most entrepreneurial employees want to establish personal brands that stand apart from their employers. It's a rational, necessary response to the end of lifetime employment. Alignment means that managers should explicitly seek and highlight the commonality between the company's purpose and values and the employee's career purpose and values. Some obvious commonality emerges naturally. Both sides thrive on progress. Companies want to launch new products and grow their market share and expand into new markets. Employees want to take on responsibilities, increase their capabilities, and yes, make more money. In other words, both company and employee want to be on a winning team. But zoom in a bit more and differences appear. Perhaps the employee has a side interest in early childhood education, but his tour of duty doesn't involve that kind of work. He does, however, value autonomy and flexible work hours, which the company can accommodate. There just needs to be sufficient alignment to make the alliance durable. So alignment for the different types of tours. The required level of alignment varies based on the type of tour. For rotational tours, it's possible to have relatively modest overlap between the employee and the company's interests. For transformational tours, there needs to be a substantial overlap between both parties' values and interests. And for foundational tours, the overlap is almost 100%. So 3 steps to building alignment. The first is establish and disseminate the company's core mission and values. So employees won't know where they stand with your company unless you can articulate what the company stands for. I think that's important. For this discussion, it doesn't matter so much what your company's values are. It just matters that you have them and that you and any other managers are able to articulate them. The goal is to enable employees to compare their personal values to those of the company or work group. The second step is learn each individual employee's core aspirations and values. The writers of the book ask, who do you look at and say, I want to be them someday? And let's keep going here. The third is work together to align employee, manager, and company. Once everyone's values and aspirations have been articulated, all parties should work together to strengthen alignment between them. And then I think we jump into examples here. And an example that I picked out was, this is in the section, Walking the Walk, How LinkedIn Builds Alignment. LinkedIn retained David Hahn for nearly a decade in a highly competitive talent ecosystem, in part because his managers built strong mission alignment between him and the company during each tour of duty. Theodore Roosevelt's famous dictum, far and away the best prize that life has to offer us the chance to work hard at work worth doing. Along the way, Hahn's managers at LinkedIn kept finding ways to define tours of duty that offered the promise of transformation for both his career and the company at large. The process of aligning values can be a long one and requires establishing a deep level of trust during a series of consistent conversations. Each conversation should build on the foundation of the previous one. So this talks about, this section is talking about how you go about defining these things that you're going to use to build your tours of duty. So define the values in the group. Almost every company has values that are written down. I would posit that companies that don't have ones that are written down, they do have ones that are not written down. Define personal values one-on-one. So, you know, in the employee-employer relationship, people might not be comfortable broadcasting their values to the entire company, but each individual manager or person responsible of working with other people should understand what the values of a particular person are one-on-one. And it talks about building trust by opening up. And, you know, if you're the person who's having this conversation with someone, to share about your values, stuff like that. So that concludes my very quick overview of that chapter. So thoughts?
Well, I'm with Watson in that the book gets far less interesting from here on out. This is when I stopped underlining things and taking good notes.
I'm saving my final critique to the open discussion.
Cool. Anybody else?
Just a question for others, like the whole the thing about I don't know, they mentioned like managers and personal has to like overlap. Like, is this the same or different, or like any thoughts on how whether the model changes for co-ops in meaningful ways? That's cool. Check. Pass.
Can you say that again? Maybe a different way?
Yeah, I guess there was a point where he said it's important that your higher ups have to understand the values and be able to articulate them, because your employees need to be able to compare them with theirs. And I guess that's all kind of internally, that dissonance, if there is any, is inside each person, maybe in a co-op. I don't know. I'm just like, does anyone have any thoughts on how that's the same or different, or does it matter in a co-op?
Unless I'm getting further ahead and where this was, there's a part where it's aligning mission statements and stuff. So going into that, and I don't think that's different in a non-cooperative entity versus a co-op itself. You could still talk about what is your purpose, and what is our purpose, and coming together as a group. And definitely there's can be big differences between co-ops, even if they're, say, doing the same type of work. So we're a software co-op, as we happen to do software development, but I would say other co-ops that are also doing technology, they may have other like central purposes, but there's shared goals between co-ops that you could start as like the alignment. So anyone coming in, that's whether you're thinking about joining a co-op, you could start with looking at co-op ideals that are shared around all of them. And then probably one of the biggest thing is determining what type of co-op from, we're a worker directed. So that's going all the way to talking about the profit and direction of how the profit and everything happens, versus saying you can control the work you're doing, but someone else is, there's a board that gets to decide on the overall direction and any profit, like how it's distributed. So that's, I think, brings it down to maybe a subset, but that's still shared with a lot of co-ops. But then when you get to something that's more aligned with this book, you're probably talking about the co-op coming together and creating something like a mission statement. So I think it's still valuable for a co-op to do that. And the transformational side, it seems to me that is a fit for any co-op, but that's, maybe I'm biased on that. I don't, I'd say even if you're the type of person that's taking rotational roles, it seems like from the standpoint of, I would like to choose to do, I don't know, be able to move between the things. I'm big on people should try to find autonomy, and whatever we build up, and I think that's a big part of co-ops, and even like co-ops working with other co-ops, that's kind of built into the, I'd say, the model. When you look towards director owned, then it's got to be, everyone has to know their own purpose and the purpose of the group to align it. So I think it's a good fit.
All right. And so on to the next chapter. And I think after this one, I'll probably just go through the last pretty quickly, because they are certainly less information dense and more example dense. Okay, so implementing transformational tours of duty. Implementing a tour of duty with strong alignment means leaving behind the rote exchanges of template-driven performance reviews where little of import is said or done. Instead, you have to have frank, open, and rigorous conversations. Both manager and employee have an explicit, albeit non-binding, agreement with shared objectives and realistic expectations. The agreement provides the criteria for regular mutual performance measurement and management. You provide specific feedback and guidance to the employee. Just as important, the employee has context in which to talk about his long-term career goals and whether the company is accommodating them as promised. Every employee gets hired into a rotational and transformational tour. Establishing a minimum mutual commitment benefits both employer and employee. You ought to know how a transformational hire will move the needle for the company before extending an offer. Similarly, new employees are much better off knowing how joining a company will allow them to advance their careers. So what is the overall objective of the tour? Hold on a second. The tour of duty you define with your employee should have a clear, detailed, and concrete mission objective. Examples include a specific project launch, internal project, or organizational initiative. What do the results of a successful tour of duty look like for the company? A successful mission objective delivers results for the company for either quantitative or qualitative goals, such as launching a new product line and generating a certain dollar amount in the first year's revenues, or achieving thought leadership in a specific market category, as measured by the writings of industry analysts. Set up a system of regular checkpoints for both sides to exchange feedback with each other. The traditional corporate approach of performance reviews based off the calendar year makes little sense in the context of the tour of duty. The mission objective, not the calendar, defines the tour of duty. Furthermore, an annual review process doesn't provide nearly enough feedback. You should set up a system of regular checkpoints to assess how the tour of duty is going for both parties. Before the tour of duty draws to a close, begin defining the next tour of duty. Well before the end of the current active tour, you should set aside time to discuss what your employee would like to do once his tour of duty is complete. Having this conversation in advance can remove the uncertainty associated with completing a tour of duty and can give the employee and the manager as well something to look forward to in the future. There are generally two possible outcomes of this conversation. The manager and the employee define a new tour of duty within the company, and the manager and employee conclude that the employee will be pursuing a tour of duty at a different company. You can hardly be expected to welcome this outcome as a manager in the context of this book, but even so, a planned exit is better for the company than being blindsided. Discuss a potential departure openly and honestly, and as your employee's ally. It's your job to help him choose the right next step. This means helping him or her assess his options, even if those options include working at other companies. An honest conversation about outside options requires courage from both manager and employee. You need to face the possible departure head on. While your employee needs to feel that you won't penalize them for sharing their true intentions, you earn this right of first conversation with the trust you build with your employees. Together, you and your employees should negotiate a transition period and drop a transition checklist. The goal of the transition checklist is to lay out everything that the company needs from the employee to finish the mission, especially the question of who will pick up the ball on the project going forward. A tour of duty is not a contract. The alliance is ethical, not legal. The tour of duty is an informal agreement to respect and honor a key relationship. Managers shouldn't use the moral imperative of the tour of duty to force an employee to stay in an onerous position. In the event that either employee or employer wants or needs to end a tour of duty before completion of the mission, the process needs to be collaborative. If an employee gets an amazing offer to work at another company, he should have the option to accept, but he should feel also the obligation to work extremely hard to ensure a smooth transition, and should even delay leaving if necessary to aid in the transition. Likewise, if a company needs to reorganize or shut down the particular initiative that comprises an employee's tour, you should work extremely hard to make sure that the employee can stay on track to achieve the previously agreed upon professional goals and personal growth objectives. If an employee departs the company in the middle of his tour without any investment in transition, he breaks the alliance and has to face the consequences. If a company, on the other hand, lays off an employee in the middle of a tour or doesn't fulfill its obligations to provide transformational growth opportunities to the employee, it is also breaking the terms of the alliance. You can't disregard the relationships and expect an employee to be an ally in the future, whether in terms of speaking well of the company, referring customers, or new employees, or anything else. With the advent of social media, the consequences to employers of breaking an alliance are far-reaching. Now that ex-employees can and do dish on what it's really like inside of a company, an employer or manager who makes a habit of breaking the alliance is warning both current and prospective employees that it's untrustworthy. And so this section sort of jumps to having the, hold on a second, jumps from talking about what happens if it's not working on either side of the employment relationship to what if the employment relationship changes because the manager changed. And so that's what that particular highlight is for. We don't need to go into that particular one. That one's pretty self-explanatory. You want to be respectful of the fact that there's a transition and that you might need to rearrange the relationship. This next section talks about what if one side is performing poorly, but and how to transition through that particular situation, but also to be respectful of the fact that ups and downs are inevitable, and both sides should maintain a long-term investment perspective, rather than responding in a knee-jerk fashion to short-term turbulence. And hold on a second. I took more notes than I thought I had on this particular section. So next we jump to having the conversation about how to have this conversation with the people in your organization. The keys to having a successful conversation about tours of duty are to be systematic, consistent, and transparent, which not coincidentally are the same principles behind the tour of duty itself. Mold the conversation to the type of tour. Prepare for more involved conversation if you're implementing a transformational or foundational tour, because it involves a personalized long-term alignment. Be sensitive to power imbalances. Usually the employer has more power than the employee, but the opposite can be true in hot job markets or for employers that have highly valuable skills. Apply moral suasion ethically. Moral suasion, rather than contractual law, binds the parties to the alliance, but you should only use this force when justified by a violation of the alliance. Too many managers try to guilt employers into staying. Don't make an employee's career choice personal, which can engender resentment, even if you convince the employee to stay. Rather, you should appeal to the principles of the alliance. Regularly check in on how the tour is evolving. Establish a basis for trust through openness and transparency, and assure that when you're having this conversation about this, I thought this was pretty interesting. Assure your employees that you're not about to fire them. Sadly, employees have been conditioned to interpret discussions about their goals and performance as early warning signs of an impending dismissal. Emphasize that the point of the alliance is mutual benefit, and that this is being put in place for all employees and all employees on the team. Be as specific and concrete as possible. And hold on a second. Oh yeah. Be as specific and concrete as possible in your designing of your tour of duty. And so, yeah, I would say certainly going over tours of duty is probably the most interesting part of the book, and certainly as far as I wanted to get. Employee network intelligence and corporate alumni networks are another interesting part that builds on the tour of duty in terms of the sorts of things that you can use, the trust that you build with this framework, to how you can leverage that to do things like find out more about what's going on in your market, or hire new people or bring new people into your group. So I'd say we could probably conclude my summary at this point.
All right, great, excellent review. Does anyone else have any critiques or thoughts?
On the alignment, helping to align employees who, let's see, value different experience, may want larger number of short or extremely varied tours. So thinking about that, just, I don't know, I was taking notes on some of those things. Alignment with the type of work seemed relevant for that. So if you're blindly going in and going, I like this, but you're not thinking of the type of work, then you may be open to different variances, but realize that it doesn't fit. So just kind of thinking about that, short or long or different types. How varied is like the work within the organization that you have? Can you offer that type of variance? I don't think it's a problem. It just needs to be known. And then I was thinking about how do you coordinate, manage multiple tour lengths and types when you have, if you're coming together like with a team and you had, and everyone's doing varied types of tours, because this is individual for everyone. So how does that work together? I mean, it's there already. I think if you think people are employing at will and everything else, but bringing that even more to the front. So that's, I guess, a positive, just a positive thing, knowing that people could be going in and out. And the mission objectives aligning, like thinking about how each tour should, you should think about how it aligns on both parties. And I was thinking that's probably it's some type of spectrum. So you may say, this is a shorter tour and it doesn't have as much alignment, but we know it allows us to move to whatever else. Or it could be, you know, much stronger alignment. So if you're thinking about that you don't, rather than say we're going to have alignment, but actually maybe even move towards like some way of measure what does one party value and want, and how aligned is it. So looking at that and the thought process along it for tours, I thought could be interesting when you're trying to think about this. Most of the other stuff was just, you know, it made sense. And probably one of the bigger, it makes sense, and then try to keep it in mind, is the regular checkpoints for sure. And then that end thing. We've talked about like this, and I think other meetups, and I know different conversations about how do you come to the end of something and do it in a positive manner. So that idea of know that you should set a time well ahead is, I think, a really good thing. And I personally want to keep that in mind. And the whole connections for outside. So if they're not going to continue within the org, leaving, I think that one is very much aligned with what we care about as a co-op, Volk. And I think it's probably a shared for, you know, most co-ops to think, if someone's going, then how do we build that network where we can continue to share even if they're not directly in the organization anymore. So some of my thoughts.
Yeah, my bone to pick is a similar one to lots of the management books, popular management books. You can drill into where they said that the individual, one of the problems is that the individual, earlier in the book, the individual might be spending a lot of time looking for other jobs and not really being fully committed to their current job. Right. Fair enough. And that means that there's some efficiencies that are missing, right? Okay. So we can capture some more efficiencies out of our people if we allow them more autonomy or more leeway to do what they want, more freedom, a little bit less risk. Maybe we're more open. We're not lying to each other. Whatever it is, now we're getting you to commit more to your job. Allow us to, even with these examples that they're giving, where people are, what was it, Lasseter or whoever that left from Disney, went and then contributed his ideas somewhere else, and then Disney, was out. They ended up paying $7 billion instead of trying to nurture that within their own company, right? And so the whole thing is, well, how do we harvest everybody's ideas? How do we get it to where people feel good and then contribute their ideas to us, but we're not going to basically give them ownership of their idea or anything like that. It's basically, how do we get people to be more efficient so we can take more out of them? And so I got a fundamental issue with that. So this is just basically the nice master instead of the mean master. And the nice master can get more out of you. This is outside of, there's takeaways, like I said, the tours of duty and all that. But to me, if you were to just take a fundamental truth, no one has got pay raises since the 80s. Like basically everyone's making the same amount of money as back then. But productivity has gone up 77% since the 80s. So that right there, no mention of that, right? So that's my fundamental problem of whenever someone says, we can get people to be more productive. Well, are you going to match that productivity that has been going on that's not been matched for the last 40 years? Not really, right? So that's my thing. So yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I hear you. I would actually disagree about this particular book. I would say that would be an alignment thing, right? That would be one of the cultural values. It's like in this particular context, so you as an individual, you value that. So you would construct an organization where you let everyone know, hey, if you come and be a part of this organization, there is a path to strong ownership. We care about that a lot. And if that is a value that someone who wants to join that organization holds, then they'll be more likely to want to join your organization. So I think that fits really well in this framework.
Yeah, I do. I think there's a limit of where it comes to ethics, though. Like if I were to say, oh, let me start up a business where there isn't that much freedom, or let me open up, let's just say in the United States, let's just say that I'm going to do something where I'm going to try to lock you into all types of contracts, right? Consent actually isn't that good of a ethical measure. You can trick people, basically, right? You can boil people really slowly. And so just setting up something and then letting people join and of their own free will, you can be really conniving and get a bunch of people, and then basically a snake oil salesman. And by the time people figure it out, it's off to the next thing. And so my point is, what is the snake oil? What is the problem with ethics is when productivity has gone up and the pay hasn't gone up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that particular point at all. I just think that this particular, that the framework here is adjacent from that. And I would say that they even kind of take that head on. So there was a section I just read where it's like, the moral suasion bit. Let me see if I can find it. Suasion. Apply moral suasion ethically. Moral suasion, whether the contractual law, binds the parties to the alliance, but you should use this force only when justified for breaking the alliance. Too many managers try to guilt employers into staying, right? So I would think that is covered under this sort of moral suasion concept. They don't really dive super deeply into it, but I think that they are actually really sensitive about the sort of thing that you're saying, where in a traditional model, they don't give you much ownership, but they make you feel like, oh, because you've been working for this company for so long, how could you do this to us? And that's the thing that they're talking about.
Yeah. You can use this if your point is that you can use this for good. Yeah, like the tours of duty. I'm saying that I put my evil hat on. I can use this for evil. I can make it to where I can exploit people even better using this system than the old system, which was authoritarian. I'd rather use this system. I'd rather have you feel like you can move around and all this other stuff. And I'd rather have that. And I can exploit you even better because it's of your own free will. You think it is, right? So that's what I'm saying. Yes, I can apply the morality onto it and make it work. But apply the ethics and everything. But just because something is more free, right? Or just because you have more alliance, that doesn't make it ethical. The ethics can fit into it. Yes, it's a great tool. So I do agree with that.
It's reminding me, I've had a facilitator tell me, the tools of a wonderful facilitator can be like turned into facipulation, and you can like totally control the whole room if you're a great facilitator. So it's like, yeah.
This whole discussion reminds me of this quote, and I'm probably not going to get it right, but something to the effect of, what's the difference between a plane and a missile? Their direction, or what they're doing.
Yeah.
I guess I had one other thing that it's just a question to see if anyone else was thinking something similar. I don't really have an answer, but I guess I was wondering whether the tour of duty framework could kind of fit nicely into the way that, I guess it seems like it's a recruitment tool, and at least in our co-op, we're not really thinking about recruitment so much right now. It's like kind of people who we know and we want to, but we definitely have weaknesses. So we could target and try to find someone and offer a tour of duty as a way to make it guided and help us be, really a little bit more, give them a good experience. But yeah, there's something about I guess the way of that you don't just bring someone in as a full-time member right away. There's this process, we'll contract with you for a while, but we hold ourselves to offering you something more after, X many months, for which, just that process of of bringing people into co-ops. I guess it seems to kind of dovetail with maybe a tour of duty length or something in interesting ways. So I guess I said it was a
definitely.
question. I lied. But
I look at this, I look at the framework, especially the tours, and the kind of trying to be open about, oh, we're on a transformational tour. Oh, there's a big transformation happening as I'm leaving. Okay, we should talk about that. Oh, there's a big transformation as people are getting laid off. Or maybe we'll talk about that a little bit earlier. Some of that I just think is being forced on the companies now, because people are doing it anyways. People have no more loyalty towards companies like 80s and 90s. People don't have horizontal loyalty anymore. They have vertical loyalty. That was the thing from Tom Peters. It's just vertical loyalty is a thing. And it's just they have no choice. You can try to be authoritarian now and top down now, and you're going to be less efficient. What's going to happen. But yeah, as far as a recruitment tool, it seems like the best way to go. If there's some way to have trials with people And then this middle ground thing I really think is great, where it's, okay, you're going to have this concerted effort for 2 years or 5 years or something, and you're going to have these goals that align, right? And you're going to measure them and everything like that. I really think that's the way to go. And then this foundational one at the end, that really makes sense. I love how they're saying you should be able to have foundational tours and you're not a founder. Essentially, the term founder should really be broadened, for that type of group, person or group or whatever. So all of that stuff it's really acknowledging the way things have to go. So yeah, I think so. As far as recruitment.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts about the book in general, and I think the first one is related to a comment I made earlier about like mission and objective based employment. And I remember reading that section being like, it's like, the SMART goal applied to employment, which is that you hire people for specific, measurable, achievable reasons in a timely way, right? And so I thought that was rather than just being kind of like an open-ended, nebulous thing that is difficult to realize when you've reached this, a moment of success. And then the other thing I thought was interesting is the timing on the transformational tour being like the 2 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And I'm sure y'all have probably seen this chart about like how to maximize lifetime earnings. And like one chart is like someone who stays at the company forever and what their wages look like, and then someone who switches jobs on a regular basis. And the point is that if you switch jobs every 3 to 5 years, so every time you've kind of had a transformational experience, to use the language here, you can like basically use that to leverage a large pay increase at another company. Whereas internally, like things like maybe like pay rate increase caps would keep you from seeing that kind of wage growth from the fact that you've transformed into a much more skillful, talented person. So and I think that kind of goes to the comment about how like, people were leaving in 3 to 5 years anyways, so this is kind of like adapting to that reality. And maybe like it can kind of adapt to that structure of, how people's wages increase based on, switching jobs at kind of important moments.
Totally agree.
Yep.
Is anyone in a
All
position
right, we're
where
running.
they're trying to think how to apply, actively thinking how to apply this, what you read in this?
The tourist
Partially,
thing is definitely something for me.
yeah.
I think could be applied.
Yeah, I mean,
The tours, I'm wondering, a lot of the talk is regarding multiple years, like 3 to 5 years type things. And it seems like in the tech, industry, it can go even smaller as far as that. And I'm wondering how small works.
Yeah,
And
I was
specifically
looking
some
up.
of the
I
stuff
was
we've
trying
done
to
is,
get
go
a
ahead.
good. I was trying to get a good benchmark. I couldn't find a number I really liked, but I saw a certain thing that was like on the low end, the average tenure at companies is about 18 months, and it can go up to, I think another benchmark sort of median is about 5 years for longer tenured people.
mhm.
See if I can find it. But keep going, Taylor, while I look up that thing.
Oh, no, that's cool. 18 months. So just thinking of how does it apply if you're if you take on projects that might be much shorter, and then thinking I guess you could still group those and go, well, we're going to try to associate multiple projects over a time period. But I like the idea of all the tours and everything, but just trying to figure out how to apply it specifically, thinking with changing and stuff, doing a lot of consulting. Well, primarily that's what I've done all my career. And sometimes maybe a large number of projects just in 1 year. And skill sets and everything else can shift around. So I was wondering, Watson, you kept bringing up the stuff about ethics, which I agree with strongly. Especially, I think it's important if you're aligned with, I would say, with director-run co-ops and exploitations. That's a big deal. So, what are your thoughts on books like this and techniques like this that don't have the ethical part baked in? Instead, as you're saying, you can layer it on top. Or if we don't, then there's a lot of room. But the point of trying to design. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have to read them. You have to. I mean, all the best business books are they're not ethics books. All your economics are gonna be empty when it comes to ethics. So you have to layer it on top. The thing that's scary is when it seems like it's, oh, this is nice, like it gives you a warm feeling. That's scary.
And maybe skipping because you're like, oh, it looks safe enough. This looks like we can be nice, and it'll work out if we're just nice.
Exactly.
Well, what I personally like about this framework is I feel like it is realistic, and as opposed to idealistic. It doesn't posit itself as the final form of a thing. It just looks at the world in the context of, a generation of people who grew up, knowing that a company could lay them off at any time, and thinking about how they were going to design their careers in the context of that. That's the way that I would look at it. I really like this framework because it's of the realisticness of it.
Maybe it's, no, you definitely have me. There's a few kind of systems I work at where I want everyone to be moral actors, but it's like really interesting when even in the realist system where people are quite self-interested and it still aligns I don't know. It's always neat when a system has there's a mechanism designed there where people still act, I don't know. Yeah, they still act in each other's best interest, even though they're maybe trying to look after themselves. I feel there's a nice thing when you can find that, because then, it's just super powered by the ethics you put in, but it's not a catastrophe without. Yeah. Sorry, that was probably abstract. I have a very specific thing in mind, but it's definitely out of scope for this conversation.
Well, it's 8:25. Probably could wrap it up if any final thoughts, and then stop the recording and talk about whatever it is you guys want to talk about.
Sorry, I've spoken a lot. I'll let someone else go first.
Oh, if you got something, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm really, maybe just because I think I mentioned I met all the people in my cooperative through a civic tech hack night, kind of weekly things. So the community of people who we're used to working with is actually much larger than the group we are. So I guess our boundary feels sometimes a little fuzzy. And I guess we're kind of eager to bleed the edges between our organization and others, which is, fraught with, you don't want to do that too much. But yeah, we're other friends from this community who started companies and consultancies. We're trying to figure out how to interact and float opportunities around, and we're inspired by a tech worker co-op in Argentina called Factic. They're kind of a consortium of tech worker cooperatives, all in a few cities, but in Argentina. And so they just, there's a lot of like, they work together and they cross paths and they share opportunities between each other. And so inspired by them, I'm kind of thinking about a lot of this about like tours of duty in other companies. Cause like the most learning happens when you go in a totally different milieu. Like, and maybe it's like, holy shit, other people are fucked and we're doing great. But like the amount of the gradient through which to learn and sift information seems stronger when you go into like different places. I don't know. I'm just curious whether anyone has like other organizations that like you're kind of in that level of like intimacy with and are thinking like ever think about exchanging people in between. Yeah.
So I think I was thinking a little bit less extreme, like than your final statement about like swapping, like wife swapping your workers or whatever, like switching like companies. But I do think that the 5th and 6th chapter of this book kind of go into that about like how you interact with people like in your industry that are in other companies, and I'd recommend checking those sections of the book out. And I think it would definitely, I don't think it would get quite as like the whole thought that you were covering, but I think that's kind of a lot of what those chapters were about kind of taking it beyond your internal company into kind of the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's our whole converting people to co-ops approach. Like it's like, hey, you're really interested in us, and like, but you have a regular company, and we kind of want to like either embed with them or have them embed with us, so that they do the work to like be our cooperative friends later. Yeah. All right, thanks, Ryan.